owners with their front doors shuttered. How does it all commence again? And in that beginning, the old phrase that was always repeated after the Seattle fire was, "We will rise like a phoenix." I think the day after the fire, the first thing that the city got together and met, and everyone happened onto this phrase and began to use it. Seattle will rise like a phoenix from the ashes. How do we deal with as a city filled with business districts and historic districts? What happens now, I think, is fundamental to understanding how we move forward. And so this is a fascinating question. But where do we go from here when so much has disappeared? Is there a potential for bringing sort of an innovative response for allowing more diverse businesses into the mix? I think that's an important question to reflect on as well. How do we come back when so many storefronts are dark?
And
so
I think a part of that, Gene, in that context, is to clearly state from the get-go that those historic districts that are designated by the city are by far not the only historic neighborhood business districts in Seattle. I mean, there's strict guidelines for being able to recognize a district as historic as being contiguous, if you will. But there are many districts that have treasures as their core that help build the identity of the business district and of the neighborhood itself. But they cannot be called a district because there's too much of a mix and match of modern and old. And so it's a really, in the context that Gene raises, it's really a challenge to think of how these business districts can come back and still preserve the uniqueness that makes them their own. I mean, the neighborhood business districts are the hub. They're the identity of their neighborhoods. They are where in normal times we all come together and congregate and collaborate and we cross paths with each other. And so it's a vitally important question about how these business districts can pop back.
Well, where else are they going to go? The problem is nationwide. When the bug flies for the ocean or for the other skies, these places are going to get filled again, aren't they? Aren't we going to all revive fairly quickly?
Well, that's arguable, Paul. I think in part that there'll be a bounce back, but I think this sustained period of people working at home and staying at home and doing everything by staring at a screen, just like we're doing now, that's going to have a long residual effect that the computer kings out there, kings and queens, are just smacking their lips about.
And and what you bring up there, Clay, is I think germane, because we have seen over the past year one of the greatest transfers of wealth in the history of the country, in which even more of the bottom 90% have moved their whatever they have is ended up in the pockets of the top 1/10%. The billionaires, I think, have increased their value by an average of a third over the past year. And what that tells us is that there's less money available for people to start new businesses. It's harder now, and yet the largest institutions and their richest owners can swoop in and buy up whatever they want for the future. So we have to be, we've long since stopped punishing monopolies in this country, but perhaps we have to reinvigorate the notion that support for for smaller businesses and institutions is fundamental to a lively society, rather than just having everything owned by a handful of billionaires, which is right now what we're looking at.
And Gene, you bring in this image of the rich swooping in and buying up properties. I can speak pretty knowledgeably about the West Seattle Junction, which I would call a historic business district, even though it's not formally so. And part of the beauty of it is that the storefronts, the properties, are owned by so many different people that it is difficult for a large buyer to swoop in and buy them all up, because the owners of these properties, to some extent, are so independent that they don't want to collaborate with each other to sell to the big buyer. That, of course, happened in a portion of the junction. You would call it the southeast quadrant of the junction. And there are high-rise apartment buildings on top of retail, just like you find in Ballard these days, so prevalent. But the other corners are kind of hanging on in their individuality. And what we were so grateful to be able to do, and we're going on about 5 years ago, was to save the two crown jewels of the junction by landmarking them. And landmarking is a hugely effective tool to preserve the best of what we've got in those districts.
You know, it strikes me that as you were talking about the way in which different communities deal with real estate as a commodity, and the many businesses owned around the junction which prevent easy acquisition by a single entity. I think the Pike Place Market model has proven to be incredibly robust, and the Pike Place Market Commission, with its insistence that chains cannot come into the market. You'll never find a Subway or a McDonald's. You'll find one Starbucks, because they can arguably say, well, they were there near the beginning of their existence.
Of course, they're a local business, Gene.
And they're a local business. But aside from that, that keeps the market, you know, very, very lively and variable. And everywhere else, we're in danger of seeing big institutions swoop in and take over some magnificent structures which, you know, have become available recently. This is happening in the market right now, in fact. So, and on the market in Pioneer Square, there's some retrofitting projects that have taken advantage of you know, property acquisition, and a lot of small businesses have evacuated. So Essential Foods, what's that? Is it the Globe building, Paul? What's the building just north of where anyone can dive in here? It's the big building just north of where Elliott Bay Books used to be, and where Essential Foods, that arcade, once was located. That building has been purchased by a major conglomerate and is being turned, you know, is being remodeled, and everyone inside is gone. But I fear that the character of the neighborhood, with small businesses, with bookstores. Think about bookstores. How many bookstores can afford to be in a commercial space anywhere in this city if they're not given some kind of break or some kind of allowance for being a bookstore? And that's a quality of life issue.
In a city that's dominated by Amazon.
In a city that's dominated by Amazon, right?
Where the ethic is not to go to a bookstore. The ethic is to sit at home and have everything delivered to you, starting with books, but expanding to everything, you know?
So, Graham, we've got you, Jen, just talking. Who am I interrupting?
I interrupted you. I was going to move us on to the next question that's related to the conversation that was happening, but please go ahead, and then I'll advance us to a related question.
Maybe you could ask, isn't it funny the only three guys here are the three that were invited? The rest of you are women. How about going through all the women here?
There are some other men who don't have their cameras on too, Paul. But
so are they embarrassed or what?
Oh, it's personal preference sometimes, but anyone can pipe up. Just unmute yourselves, like Taylor mentioned at the beginning.
Well, the
So
question I was going to ask is kind of related to where Jean and Clay started to go, about kind of the value of the small business, and the way that it's worded is, in what ways are our business districts and historic districts contributing to the overall feel and culture of the city? And you both got us started with some very specific examples of that, but would love to hear from some other folks on that topic before we dive deeper into the subject. And like Naomi said, just feel free to unmute and share.
Any contributions from the audience? What do you think about?
Yeah, Harriet, Cindy, Nicole. What do you think? Harriet Wasserman, speak up.
I've just barely started listening to you guys, and everything you said is certainly true. It's a little bit scary. I hope we find some more hopeful directions someplace along the line. I'm of course on the Capitol Hill area, which has changed hugely over time, and nobody could afford anything, be it houses or businesses or space. And yet it's a shell of what it was. When you mentioned the recovery period, I have no clue how Capitol Hill is going to recover. You still go by and see the remains of the the area that was messed up there. And it's worrisome and sad. I have nothing positive, which is why I didn't chime in, but I'm one of the people that's just been sitting at home. As you said, everything comes to my house. And when we get out, I don't know how things are going to change, but I worry about my business area around me, both the smaller businesses, several of the little ones on 19th have closed, and then the bigger Broadway area, which is our city near us. So I'm listening, trying to look for anything positive in these directions.
Yeah, I used to live on Broadway. Peter's on Broadway. Remember that? Peter's on Broadway?
What?
Do you remember Peter's on Broadway?
Oh, yes.
I lived upstairs. Oh, that's neither here nor there. But that's what, 40 years ago or something.
So I'm going to pick on the person that I see right next to Harriet, and that's Nicole Klein. What do you think, Nicole?
Oh, on the spot. Well, I live in Clay's world over here in West Seattle, so I appreciate all the work that he's done and his team over the years. And with regards to business, it's so hard with your question, because so everything is so awful right now with COVID, and how many businesses just can't make it. And so I'm trying to set that aside, because those places, they just have to survive. And I would hope that a historic district would help them, give them a boost to make it through, like you said, with bookstores. But the Ballard district, I know well. I used to live over there, and not knowing it was a historic district, because I just moved to Seattle. I don't know when it became one, I can't remember. But you really enjoy that sense of, I don't know, familiarity of the buildings having character, and the businesses in there having something different to offer. And I always felt like you got to know people quicker. I don't know. It just felt like, because there was an ownership of pride and less transition of businesses, I don't know. It just felt homier to me when I was down there. So
Nicole, you're really hitting something that resonates with me. That there's a phrase I've used for many years now, and that the original social media is face to face, not Facebook, face to face, face look. And you do that by being proximate to other people. And you said that such a district makes it possible for you to get to know people more quickly. And I really think that preservation is not just about buildings. It is about creating identity, and it's about leaving legacy, because none of us gets out of here alive eventually. And it's about hope. It's about putting things in place that are for our succeeding generations, whom we're never going to know. And so I think it's a noble pursuit, and I think it goes way beyond our own self-interest. And and it behooves us all, because and this isn't just for people who have been here a long time. It doesn't matter if you've lived here 40 years or 40 days. I really believe we all have a, a, an inner drive to feel like we're at home. And the more that we have these touchstones that allow us to learn about the history of our home, the happier people we are. We're better citizens. We're more, as you say, Nicole, we're more we're more likely to engage in that original social media. We're not going to hide out from each other. We're not going to, we're going to engage and connect and inspire each other. I really think that's what this is all about.
Thank you both. And I'd love to continue us actually on this particular thread. I know I keep bouncing us around, but I'd love to hear from some other folks like related to this. So what makes a good, I love subjective questions, business district? And, you know, what examples of that do you see in Seattle? Nicole and Clay definitely got us started there, but I'd love to kind of hear everyone else's thoughts on that. I love the face-to-face over the Facebook. I'm gonna take that.
I didn't invent that. A friend told me that 10 years ago, and I thought that I got to spread that around. Face look, not Facebook.
Thank you for that.
Can I just throw in very quickly?
Yes, please do.
It seems to me that another aspect of the city, which I think most of us just are unaware of or pay no attention to, but we've lost not only our restaurants and a lot of small stores, but we've also lost performing arts. And I think that a huge portion of every neighborhood, it's so important that we maintain those art institutions, whether they're the art museums, the galleries, the actors and musicians who make up so much of our vibrant tapestry as a community. And it's great that sports have so many millions of dollars to throw at the athletes and keep them hitting balls and kicking and doing what they will. But it's extremely vital now that we pay attention in every one of these business districts to the arts and artists and performers. I think that's something that would be very important to support, because all the actors that I know are, if they're successful, they're recording audiobooks. That's it, and everyone else is hanging on for dear life and driving for Uber and barely making it by. So that would be something that I think we have to be very careful about preserving and not allowing to be plowed under in this spirit of renovation and recreation. If we don't bring back the arts and music and theater, we're gonna lose an awful lot more than we bargained for. So that
Gene,
would be
a close cousin to that, Gene, is the movie theaters. I mean, the ones that are left in neighborhoods really are catalysts for business health and commerce in that. And I know that directly from experience with the Admiral Theater in West Seattle, where when it was closed for 3 years after it was landmarked and before it was reopened, we had a lot of empty storefronts as a result. I mean, it's clear they can become hubs. The Columbia City movie theater is hanging by a thread. I mean, there are not that many of them. It used to be, we used to have neighborhood movie theaters all over the city, and one by one, they've gone down. We were just talking earlier today about the Guild 45th in Wallingford. I mean, that's a big gaping hole in that business district. And to the extent that we can foster those kinds of businesses to go along as a part of the arts, they'll draw people to get together and create lots of spin-off business for nearby stores.
Oh, and Eugenia has her hand up also. I couldn't agree with both of you more. I heart the arts.
Thank you. Yeah, well, the Seven Gables just also burned down, so that's really depressing. But
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
I moved here for graduate school in 1993, and one of the things I love about Seattle is the where all these neighborhoods and the business districts, whether formally designated historic or not. What I love about them, what they have in common is that pedestrian scale. You know, as to be able to walk down the main streets or some of the side streets and poking into some of the shops and the restaurants and you know, just whether it's appreciating the architecture or, like I said, the scale, it just makes you want to be out and about and supporting all the businesses. And you run into, even today as Seattle has gotten bigger, you know, in normally not pandemic times, you know, it's still a small enough city that you run into friends, which I love. And I think I'm hoping, and this is a very resilient city, and obviously this pandemic is global and the impact is really serious, but I think Seattle will bounce back, and you know, I know my husband and I, we personally love to support local businesses. We always have, and we try not to order online, and so and you know, I just being able to do that and connecting with the neighbors and the neighborhoods and all the business owners. It's just been, I think that's really important, and it is about people and place. And so I, you know, with the vaccine and everything, and there's finally a light at the end of the tunnel. There's hope, and I think we just kind of have to keep
hope alive.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, what Eugenia, what you mentioned with the human scale is something that I've always found from the very first time I visited and spent time in Paris. It was something that I found so profoundly wonderful about this downtown core of Paris, that you couldn't build over 6 stories, that light was something you wanted to hold on to for everyone, and that as you walk down the streets, you didn't feel dwarfed by 60-story buildings. You're in a human environment. And I think what you describe about Seattle that's one of the things I don't want to lose, is that sense of light and that sense of space. And one of the other triumphs of historic Seattle, and all of you together, and so we applaud, is the beginning of perhaps getting a landmark status for the Hahn building, which keeps light pouring into the market rather than putting up a, 14-story condo. So that's another important issue. I don't want to lose that especially taking pictures. I don't want to lose that sense of space and light, and just have have everything turned into great looming blocks of shadow and occlusion. So anyway, I love the human scale aspect of what you're talking about.
And one reason for hope about that is the fortunate topographical aspect of Seattle. My mom, who was born and raised in West Seattle, she used to say every other house in West Seattle has a view because of all the hills. And it may not be the same view, but we have the opportunity to achieve what Jean is talking about, or at least preserve some of it. The wheels of progress are grinding 24/7. It's it was startling to me to look at the map of the historic districts in Seattle, and it's very nicely designed on the city's website, with kind of a web of them, coming out at all angles. But if you look at the footprint of those districts, they are very small compared with the rest of the city's footprint. So there's every reason to want to seek to protect more.
Can I ask Paul a question? Paul, can I ask you a question?
Oh, yeah.
In your nearly 40 years of documenting this stuff formally, what do you mark as the greatest changes, for better or for worse? I mean, are there as far as appreciation of these historic districts. 'Cause I think, as Clay said, you've sort of led the way with popular history, but what's the big what are the big changes that you've witnessed over since 1980?
I think I've lived all those years. I've lived through all those years half asleep, and I don't have any strict or strong sense of what the right answer is to your question, which is what do I most notice as a change for the better or the not the better. So I will have to pass on that. I don't have any strong opinions on that.
When we were talking before, and we earlier today, and I asked this question, you said, actually, I am not so concerned today. I'm not worried because the forces that celebrate and cherish history have grown stronger in the last decades. That's perhaps one change. That's what I'm trying to tease out of you. Has that happened actually? Have we seen preservationism become a force to be reckoned with? Is it since 1982?
I think that's surely the case, that there are a lot of people that have a desire to hold on to the stuff that's most cherished, and we'll hold on to it. And sometimes we have to lobby for laws to put some legal muscle into those holdings, but I think we're going to do pretty good. Look at that downtown behind you. My goodness. When I came here, years ago, it was nothing like that.
No, it certainly wasn't. I'd like to also just kind of do a little diversion. Sorry, Taylor, but I really want to mark, we're all deeply involved and concerned about the state of our First Peoples, the Duwamish, in Seattle and environs. And I think that it's they probably once again have a chance to attain tribal status. So especially under this new administration. You all know, I'm sure, that they had it for a few months. If you've talked to Cecile Hansen, she can express her pain over this, but they had it for a few months at the end of the Clinton administration. And as soon as Bush came in, he did them in. So I think that now there's some very interesting developments. And so I certainly am enormously supportive and will do everything I can to publicize and be part of the process, helping the tribe attain federal status. So that's, I think, a big push. So I just want to throw that in because I think it's great. We acknowledge their gift to us, and it is a gift and a theft. But at the same time, it's time to start paying the back rent, and one of the ways is to ensure that they have federal status. So,
and you're going to see more and more of that in the columns that Jean and I prepare, the now and then columns, as the successors to Paul. This topic is it already has appeared, but it will continue to appear in the coming months and years.
Yeah. So onward.
Yes, and actually that's a great segue into, I want to maybe tweak the way that I worded the question, but I appreciate you bringing that up, Jean. And the way that the question is worded is, what are some ways that Seattle's business districts are cultivating inclusive entrepreneurship? But I almost want to just broaden that question and talk about the ways that our city as a whole is just being inclusive. And we can talk about that through the lens of our relationship with Indigenous communities, but would love to hear some thoughts on that. And if it relates to a specific business district, that'd be awesome. I mean, I know some folks are, like I've seen this a lot on Instagram, like instead of kind of geo-tagging Beacon Hill, it just says Greater Duwamish. And so I think that might be one very kind of low-hanging fruit step there. But if anyone else has thoughts on this, before I move us in a different direction, would love to hold space for other contributions.
I saw Nicole's hand a second ago.
Awesome.
Okay, I can answer that on my opinion, and then say my little statement I was thinking of, which was the building, the shell house behind me, sits on Duwamish land, and I've learned a lot through Cecile and others about that history. But I'm also at a state university, and I've been learning the complexity of, we have an agreement to recognize only federally recognized tribes. And it's so complicated, and it's so hard to do the right thing. And as a person and as a voter, I can do things on my own, which is my, desire. But the effort we've currently made is to always attach a Carrie canoe in Southern Lachute to the name. And that's a big start for the UW, a precedent setting to say that we will put an original place name with our name that we now call that site. So I think that's great. It's a first step, but the training I'm taking this week with Washington, the preservation in DC, the big conference that's happening right now, I'm just learning lots about the importance of buildings in general, that people have an attachment to buildings, and I do, but I didn't know it was like a thing that you really don't probably get asked enough about to people. Like, what if that building were to be gone? Why does it matter to you? So that reaffirmed to me that. But to get back to the tribal piece, they often were saying our history. They were talking about historic barns, like those are important. It's our history. They kept using the word our, and that's such a hard word, because whose history are they talking about? And I can guess which one. We default to that one. They did try and make a point of talking about racial equity and civil rights, but they weren't talking about Indigenous very often, which I found interesting. Even the historic barn stuff, which I am proud of that Washington has, but where are those barns sitting? Whose history are we saving? So they talked about sites, not houses or buildings, but sites and ground to talk about as historic. And I thought that was it'll be challenging, but good for us.
Thank you, Nicole. I agree with you about the word our. That is layered, to say the least. Any other thoughts? I definitely don't want to leave anyone out. No. Okay. So the next question is, again, kind of related to this larger conversation about preservation and I imagine the reason that we even have historic districts in the first place. But it's an acknowledgement that change will happen, obviously. The world keeps on spinning, at least for now. And as Seattle specifically continues to evolve and grow, what things are important to preserve? And thank you, Nicole, for getting us started with thinking about that. And specifically, what would you hate to see Seattle lose as we continue to evolve and grow and change over time? When I wrote that particular question, I really thought about the neighborhood that I grew up in, which is essentially Columbia City, and the ways in which that historic district has changed over my lifetime, and the things that I miss and things that I now appreciate that weren't there before. And what struck me is my own kind of internal conflict, and even answering that question for myself about the neighborhood that I, love. But also, I think I didn't realize that I was mourning some things that just aren't there and likely aren't coming back anymore. So very kind of worded intro, but would love to hear y'all's perspectives on that. And again, it's, as the city continues to change, what is it important to preserve? And what would you hate to see the city lose with that growth? And we've talked around this, but I think this is an opportunity for everyone to kind of share. And it can be, whatever. It could be shoe stores. That's a me thing. And Clay, you look like you were about to see something.
Well, I'm intrigued to learn your answer to that question for Columbia City. I mean,
oh, what am I sad?
Yeah, what are the example? What would be a good example of what you're asking?
Yeah, the businesses or the things that are missing that immediately came to mind. I know that Columbia City has a lot of restaurants and things now, but I remember being a kid and Columbia City being a place where my parents and grandparents would go and hang out, get dressed up. and listen to music or like host their parties at different venues. And I know the like Esquire Club is still there, but there was a bar there named Angie's that I think I just went to once before it went away. And I honestly don't even know if I was 21. Shush, didn't say that. But places like that really
limitations.
Places that actually kind of, I don't know, cultivated a diverse community fun. I don't necessarily feel that way anymore when I like go to Columbia City. And I know that as the neighborhood has evolved, my mom doesn't hang out in the neighborhood, even though my family still has a house in the neighborhood. I find, or just from observation, she spends more time, I would say, in probably Pioneer Square and Capitol Hill than in Columbia City. And she's essentially going to those neighborhoods for the things that used to exist in this one, whether it be kind of social stuff or she's a big fan of like gift shops and bookstores. And that's not to say that the neighborhood doesn't have them, but going back kind of to the inclusive entrepreneurship question, I think what I have seen that neighborhood lose is some of that diversity that was appealing to, I guess, longtime residents. And that was the thing that immediately came to mind. Like I used to get my hair done by a woman who had a shop there for decades. And she was in Rainier Beach, and I think her new shop is in Renton. And she just couldn't afford to be there anymore. So things like that. The flip side of that coin, if we're talking about things that are now in the neighborhood that weren't there before, like I'm not sad to have 2 ice cream options that are really delicious. Like that didn't exist when I was a kid. It was really Baskin Robbins, and no shade to them, but I'd much prefer the shops that are there right now. And I appreciate that if I wanted to, I could walk to PCC instead of having the longer walk to like the Seward Park location. So I'm super wordy, but those were my like very Taylor specific examples. An interesting one that I feel conflicted about is, all of the apartments and new buildings that are in the neighborhood, right? Like I have friends who live in those buildings, and while it's really nice that they live close, kind of at what cost, and whose homes are no longer there anymore as a result of that. So.
You're underlying what you're saying is the notion that there are landlords and tenants. And a lot of the businesses that you're remembering fondly probably were tenants. They didn't own their building. And so we get into what Jean was talking about the wealthy getting more wealthy and buying up more. And the tendency and the pressure is certainly, I know this in West Seattle, I know it's everywhere, is to once things go bigger and go up, the only businesses that can afford to be in that first floor retail spot are the national chains. The block in the West Seattle Junction that I talked about that went high rise, went to 7 floors. It's no accident that the retail on the bottom is Starbucks and Chipotle. Well, there's Starbucks and Chipotle everywhere, so it's kind of an inevitable and very sad result of becoming a richer city, so to speak, and forcing the people who used to be able to afford it outside of the city. And it's not just downtown; it's the neighborhood business districts, as you're pointing out.
Yeah, 1000%. And I recognize that I'm like a sentimentalist, and I am a people person, so I pay attention to the people and people. Period. I love people watching, but I think at the heart of, I guess, all of what I was talking about is definitely what you were saying, and also just this loss of loss of soul, loss of inclusive, welcoming, we all live here, energy that just doesn't quite feel the same. And it's not just Columbia City.
Well, you're not the only one with a heart out there. I think everybody has that yearning for something stable that feels like home.
And I think when you mentioned Columbia City, Taylor, it's also it fits within Eugenia's construction of a welcoming human scale city. That
Mhm.
as you walk along those streets, even today in Columbia City, there's something kind of magical about not being surrounded by 20-story high rises. That you still have these older 2- and 3-story buildings, and there are businesses that line the sidewalk, which are owned by individual business people. But it comes back to that for me, in any case, it comes back in significant part. These historic districts often have a lower profile. They maintain a more human scale. So we're not quite so, as we walk amongst them, we're not quite so diminished, but we can still point and say, ooh, that feels like home, rather than, oh, that's a big glass and steel structure and I don't know where I fit in, you know. So I think that's hearkening back to Eugenia's original comment about human scale.
And
So,
Harriet, you were talking about wanting to find some hope. And this may sound kind of perverse, but I think there's a maximum preservation that does provide hope, in that where you have a high-rise, apartment on top, retail on the bottom, go in, that replaces something that used to be human scale. That's not a good thing, of course, but the maxim is sometimes something's got to go down in order to save what's still there. And when people realize what happened to that piece of property, they can be more energized to get involved to save the places that are still left. In other words, they're negative examples that can motivate us.
right. The sinking ship garage is the classic negative example.
Absolutely.
We can always
Absolutely.
point to and say, isn't that horrible? And let's not do that one again. And we sometimes we learn from that, and sometimes we don't. But it is I guess and there's also that element of feng shui. How do we walk these streets and feel like we're in a place that we recognize and that we can hearken back to, that can contain our past and our sense of it, our present, and hope for the future. And I think that those historic neighborhoods often mark all those boxes, allow us to think about all of these things in balance.
Gene, you mentioned the sinking ship. One thing that when we did shows for the book, we did some 35 shows, a constant high point of each time was telling, and maybe you can tell this story just briefly, of what did the sinking ship inspire? What do we have today because the sinking ship went in?
Yeah, if you came to these shows, and Paul will validate this, who was inspired by the destruction of the Occidental and Seattle Hotel? It was Victor Steinbrueck and a couple other preservationists. But out of that destruction, when only a few years later, when the Pike Place Market was threatened, when the mayor at the time said, let's tear it down and replace it with parking and condos, a huge preservationist movement rose up to save it. And if they had not been able to point at the loss of the hotel, this beautiful Flatiron Hotel, which was replaced by a rather horrible parking lot, if they hadn't been able to say, this is what happens when you don't pay attention, when you let down your guard, you will lose something that's important. And so they were able to point forward and say, don't let this happen to the Pike Place Market. Whatever you do, don't you dare let this happen. And we honor Victor today with the Victor Steinbrueck Park at the north end of the market, because he really, this, along with some others, but, he was sort of he was the head of the spear leading the saving of Pike Place Market. Imagine a city, our city, and I say our advisedly, imagine our city without the market. You know, how diminished would a place would this be if those blocks, that particular delightful street was gone. So that to me is again one of those. These are the joys and the hopes of history, is that we can hang on to what's most important and cherish it and use it to guide us forward, and perhaps find ways to be more inclusive and more involved in dealing with other issues like Duwamish tribal status, you know. So
Well, Jean,
anyway.
that was a better ending than what I had in mind. So thank you for really kind of summarizing the entire conversation in your remarks. We are 3 minutes officially over our end time, and I do want to respect the fact that we all probably need to eat dinner, you know, and chill and do whatever you need to do on this Wednesday. That was very sunny and yes, that too, Jean. So if we didn't get to you, I'm so sorry. If you do have questions, either for me or Jean, Paul, Clay, you are more than welcome to email me. Like I said, I will send a follow-up email to all of us with everything that was, I don't think we have links in the chat, but based on the conversation, I have a few things that I want to share. And then, this last thing. So Jean generously gave us a box of books. And originally we thought that we might hand those out to all of you ahead of this meeting. But when I realized that the articles were just available on the website, thank you both for all three of you really for making the website so accessible. I thought, you know what? I'm just going to offer them to the group. So if anyone would like a copy of the book, Seattle Now and Then, please just let me know, and we'll coordinate you picking that up from our office, the Dearborn House in First Hill. And I'll be sure to put that in the email as well. And just the first, I think I took one, I'm not giving mine back, so I think there are 5 left. First 5 people to respond will be able to get a free copy of the book. And then our next building dialogue discussion will be in May, topic TBD, but we will announce that as soon as that is confirmed. And I think that is everything. Again, thank you. Thank you so much, Clay and Jean and Paul, for joining us. This was awesome. And thank you again for the books. And thank you all for your contributions. I really like this program, and it's awesome to just hear and learn from all of you. So until next time, and you'll see that email from me.
Thank you, Taylor.
Thank you.
Thanks, Taylor.
Thank you, Taylor.
Yeah.